I wanted to talk about this, and I'll let everybody speak to it, was, I have enough people calling me about, oh, I want to get a job. I want to, what do I have to do to make it, go up the ladder, the coaching ladder, and who do I got to know, and how many floors do I have to sweep, and squat racks do I have to polish? And at some point, in this one case, this guy's really passionate about, making it to whatever, a college or a pro team. And he's sacrificing a lot. And there's no guarantees, obviously. And I talked to Rob a bit about this already, and I'll let him start because, he made some good points, but at the same time, I think his phrase was, you got to cut bait at some point. And so, when is that point? I mean, it's very personal. So I'll let Rob start. Rob, and this could be any field. It doesn't necessarily have to be, you gave me some examples outside of sports and strength and conditioning. But when does somebody have to consider, okay, let's look at something else?
I think that's up to the individual. First of all, I would never deter anybody for following their dreams. I would support them and make sure they had some type of plan with regards to the process of getting there. So if we're going to speak about strength and conditioning, I'd make sure you get a teaching degree or something you fall back on. And, if you didn't make it to the NFL or the NBA or Major League Baseball or even big time college or a college job at all, there's nothing wrong with teaching and coaching at the high school level. And in my opinion, if you could coach high school kids, you could probably coach anybody, technically at least. But I'll give two examples. Derek and I were speaking. Myself, I went to practice with two other guys, and you're taking a lot of risk. You're putting your home up as collateral, the whole deal with the banks, etc. And we figured there were three guys, and we'd have three offices and different areas of New York, Long Island, New York City, and Queens. And we just pool the money. We make a good living. And 5 years later, we're 185 facilities in 5 states. And no one would have dreamt that. And so, I'm a big believer in following your dreams and just working through it. And the other example, Derek and I spoke about, I have a friend I went to high school with. You may have heard his name. His name is Steve Buscemi. He's an actor. And he would just go to the worst areas and try at the comedy clubs, whatever, was falling on his face, and wound up being a New York City fireman, and I think just saved his money for about 2 years, had a secure job with a pension, and left to pursue his dream, and he made it. So, when do you cut bait? I guess when there comes a point in time where financially you can't do it anymore on that path. And so, I know someone who is an assistant at a Division I university. It's a smaller D1 school. He's an assistant making $5,000 a year. He's not even making $100 a week. So I'm sure his family's supplementing him, and he's just trying to figure out how to go on. And either he'll figure that out, or at some point in time, he's going to have to fall back on his degree and maybe coach in high school. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's nothing wrong with still participating as a strength coach. But I think you got to follow your dream. And then I think it really comes to a point in time where, this isn't going anywhere. And I think only the individual could determine that, whether it's opportunity, whether it's finances, or whatever it may be. But I would not deter anybody to follow their dream.
Yeah, and could you do me a favor, Rob? Could you tell Steve Buscemi I'm a big fan, and the only reason you and I are going to Fargo, North Dakota is because of that movie? Okay. We're going in April for do a conference. Anyways, thank you, Rob, for that intro. I'm going to get Eric Corum to start next, and maybe, Eric, you can share some thoughts with regard to your path, but also like some of the people that are working under you or have worked under you, and what you're advising people, or even interns or students.
Man, this is such a timely deal, because I'll just be honest, Derek, at some point in your career, whether it's you're in and out of this thought, it's like when is enough enough? Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? And I think about that, and nothing wrong with living in Virginia, but my wife and I, neither of us are from this area. And so, a lot of times people don't realize, like, when doing this job, you're straining your family. And I think that's a big part of the equation if you do have a family. Even just your parents or whoever your nuclear family was that you're growing up, being separated for them. But, my path was, I got lucky. So I wanted to start with this really quick. I got into this thing called the Presidential Leadership Scholars, and it's been unbelievable for me. It's totally out of my realm, and you can go look it up. But we basically the Clinton, Bush, and LBJ Foundation picked 60 scholars, and you get trained by the former presidents and their administrations on leadership and decision making, and you have to have an agenda. And I went to the first deal in DC for a week. And this guy who is the chief economic advisor to Bush, he's actually a professor at Stanford, did this activity with us. And they had us list out, and we had to order it, typical contributors to financial success: unfair advantage, effort, innate ability, or luck. And then what we had to do, it had nothing to do with the actual concept. What we had to do is partner up with somebody, rank order these things, and then be able to represent their thoughts and views. But as I've been thinking about these 4 things, they've been resonating with me lately. It's the strength and conditioning field. Some people start out with an unfair advantage. They have a big name. Like Brian Cushing is a good friend, worked with the Texans. His first job as assistant strength coach of the Houston Texans. I'm excited for Brian. Great for him. But that may be considered an unfair advantage. You played the game and were at a real high level in whatever your sport was. Effort. There's a ridiculous amount of effort that has to go into this. Innate ability. Some people are just better than others. You know what I'm saying? Like, some people are just better at this job, just like every other profession. And then there's some luck that's involved. You ran into somebody knows somebody, they dropped your name. You see what I'm saying? So there is a skill set that needs to be developed and refined, but sometimes there's just some freaking luck that goes into this deal, and getting your foot in the door at the right time, at the right place. And so, there's guys I'm advising right now, or interns that come in, and we're like, look, like, you come in, you bust your butt, you provide value, you learn. We're going to do everything we can to get you a job. Sometimes you go into a place and they could care less. They just want to use you, And so that, I think those 4 things really play into the arc of your career: advantage, effort, innate ability, and luck. And some of those things are you have no control over, and there's some things that you do have control over. But you can do everything right and get fired. I mean, there's people that we know that were 8 years ago in the top of the profession, and now where are they? You know what I'm saying? Or they hit us. I hate to say this, but in strength conditioning, there's an age ceiling in a sense. And then you kind of, I hate to say it, but like, you don't see a lot of people over the age of 60, for instance, really crushing it anymore, where in other careers, you're at your prime earning age and you're doing your best work. You know what I'm saying? Like my parents, my mom and dad are just really crushing it right now, but it took that long. So I just, I really want to get in this conversation, because there's some days I'm like, man, I love what I'm doing. I love the impact I'm having, but the hours, or is it ever going to calm down? I got kids, there's a lot of things you got to take into account.
But can your mom and dad run faster 40 than Rich Eisen?
I'll tell you what, that hashtag was pretty good. Now, I don't know who coached him up, but he's made some progression.
Good points, Eric. I want to ask Tracy, what are your thoughts on this? Like, if we talk about the coaching profession, but also the impact of being female in this profession, is it harder? Is it more imperative for, a female to make that decision? Am I staying with this, or do I have to cut out earlier, or are there any differences in your opinion?
Well, I certainly think you benefit. I've benefited from having very well-respected male mentors who can introduce you to other people and give you an opportunity to show that you have skills and you have what it takes. So that's essential, I think. And the other thing is, for me personally, I don't have children. My husband has been very supportive. We up and sold our house and closed up my shop in St. Louis and moved out to Utah 5 years ago for my job with US Ski and Snowboard. And, that was a huge financial risk, a huge change. And so you have to have family support. And certainly for those women who have children, that seems to me, I don't know how many women who are strength and conditioning coaches that do have children, how many I could name. But, if you do choose to have a family, then that would require quite a big input from the rest of your family to help care for those things. So you have to kind of, it just depends on your personality, and you have to really kind of maybe be able to walk the walk a little bit more, because how you look is going to affect things. And certainly you can't have a big thick neck and a goatee. That's not going to go over well. If you're female, probably. So, you have to be athletic, and certainly if you're a badass athlete, it helps you command the environment a little bit more and earn the respect. And so those things, if you're tiny, or if you're heavy as a woman, those things are going to really affect, I think, your ability. Then you really have to step it up and really show your skills and be able to really command a room and win the respect of the people that you're around. There's nobody's going to give me I didn't play football. Nobody is going to give me a job because I just played football or whatever. So it just, yeah.
Would Lindsey Vaughn make a good strength coach?
The amount I've seen her, I don't think so. She's a physically capable person, size wise, probably about my size or a little bit bigger, but she's very strong. But I don't think she would make a good strength coach. Michaela Schifrin might make a good strength coach. But and there's one other female strength coach at US Ski and Snowboard. Well, there's one female strength coach now. I'm not there. And she's about 5'2", and everyone considers her extremely, she's been there since she did an internship there and has worked there her whole career. But she is known as the resident badass. And I think you kind of almost have to have that to be successful. Because if you're too mousy or too, wishy-washy, flaky, you're not gonna go over well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, some really good points there, especially on, even for guys, like if guys are more cerebral and less animated, I think sometimes that works against them too. Now, you have a physical therapy background. Rob does. Doug, I'll get Doug to jump in. We'll get you guys to talk about this. But that seems like when people ask me, should I go into performance or should I go into rehab? I'm pushing people into rehab because I just think it's a more stable, and I don't know, the therapist can tell me about this, but I think it's a more stable career to kind of build your foundation off if you want to get into performance. Doug, do you want to talk a bit about that? And then we can get Rob and Tracy to talk about it as well. There we go.
I think it's a different question if you're talking about coaching versus physical therapy, because if you have a a medical license, like in physical therapy, for the most part, when you graduate from your program, you're going to have a job available to you. It might not be the job that you really, you want, like the ideal job, but you'll have something and you'll have a way to support yourself. Now, granted, I'm sure some of the PTs here would say that, compared to the cost of education, the salaries probably aren't proportionate, relative to the amount of education that you have, but you're going to have a job. Whereas if you're trying to get into strength and conditioning, you can get like a CSCS, but for the foreseeable future, you might still be working for very little money, which is why I loved Rob's idea of just, if you want to be a strength coach, get a teaching degree, because that way you've got something to fall back on. You could always be a strength coach as a teacher. As a teacher, you have a full-time salary. You can get a pension if you're in it long enough. And then if you've been practicing as a strength coach, you might get the opportunity to work somewhere else in a more quote unquote athletic setting. And I think that getting a teaching degree and learning to be a teacher would probably make you a better strength coach than getting an exercise science degree as an undergrad. And you can get the coaching stuff or the strength specific stuff later on as an intern or through the apprenticeship model. I don't know if academic programs are cultivating or developing great strength coaches. I think you get that through your practical experience and having the right mentor. So with PT, yes, you are guaranteed a job, but I would say that part of the reason why I started my own practice, and maybe Tracy could speak to this too, and even Rob, is that there's a certain way that I wanted to practice. And if I had done it like the safe way or the safe route, I would have been a little bit more constrained, because having this whole performance physical therapy hybrid, like that's not the norm in the profession. But the flip side of that is there's more downside to starting your own thing. I was lucky in that I went from the military to physical therapy school. So I didn't join the military with the intent that it would pay for physical therapy school, but that ended up being a bonus where I had the GI Bill. So I was not $200,000 in debt. So I could take on more risks. So you could say that I had a more like disadvantaged or privileged background to be able to do that. Whereas someone who's in more debt doesn't have the freedom to take that risk. So a lot of variables play into it, but I would say that if you're looking for something safe and to make a decent living, yes, the medical route, the PT route is an option, but you're still, just like with strength and conditioning, there's still always going to be, if you really want to do things the way that you want to do them, sometimes you've got to take the risk and do it on your own terms, because whether you work for a PT practice, a university, a pro sports team, unless you're calling your own shots, you're always going to be making some compromises. But with that autonomy comes a lot of risk as well. So it's really this decision matrix that really depends on so many variables in the individual.
Yeah, I'm going to thanks, Doug. That's awesome. I'm going to throw it back at Tracy and get her thoughts on that as well, as, this performance rehab balance and the autonomy piece, because you're much more autonomous now. Tracy, what thoughts do you have?
I agree with Doug. You certainly have, so I have essentially two different skill sets that I can market, and so I have a wider range that I can offer, and that makes opening your own business a little bit easier, even though it's very challenging and scary. In an actual performance team, I will say sometimes because I am a physical therapist, I was not at first taken seriously as a strength coach. That I was viewed a little bit like not a real strength coach sometimes. And so you you really have to win people over with that and show command of the strength and conditioning profession. You have to really know the language and be able to speak the lingo and be in that culture, and which is pretty hard for most physical therapists and athletic trainers sometimes. Like if you haven't trained and you don't know what these people do and where they're going to go, and you haven't worked with elite athletes and understand what they're trying to develop, you won't be respected. So that was kind of an interesting sense that I got over the last 5 years. And And I'm very grateful. I was invited to speak at a conference at the 2017 USOC High Performance Symposium, and I was the only kind of hybrid professional on the panel, and there were a couple PTs in the audience that were local, but really there was not a lot of mixing. I think now there's a little bit more understanding and valuing of multi or interdisciplinary people, or people who can kind of really bridge that gap. But if you're a newbie coming into the profession, I struggle to guide people to PT school right now, just because of the cost and the time, and like, you really have to know what you're doing, and I don't even know if there are programs that are better than others as far as like really connecting and working with more performance-based kind of programming. Because it is so hard. You have to really, I kind of fell into it by accident, but it's a long road, and I don't know that I would tell someone, if they wanted to be a strength coach, to go to PT school quite yet, because they could make a whole lot of money doing personal training. That might be boring, but they would feed themselves better more quickly if they did that.
Okay, those are great thoughts. I'm always thinking grass is greener, and but Rob, you're kind of the original hybrid. And again, I don't know what premeditation there was about what you were getting into, but what would you have to say to young people who wanted to work in sports or performance sports, and maybe wanted to coach, but maybe they wanted to do the rehab piece too? How would you counsel them?
Yeah, I can tell you this. I wanted to work with athletes, and I've been a head strength coach for 2 pro teams and a D1 university. I was at St. John's for 10 years, and I used to spend my off seasons working with Johnny Park and the New York Giants. And if I have a name that got on the map, the reason why it got on the map was adapting principles of strength and conditioning into the rehab setting and publishing and speaking on it. So I can't value enough my strength and conditioning coach experiences. I'll also tell you that as a coach, there is such a correlation to coaching and running a business, you wouldn't believe it. Handling people, budgets, the whole deal, programming things, how to get people to work together, how to work with different departments, etc., is really a strong correlation. When I was at St. John's, I asked Coach Conaseca, our basketball coach, once, and I knew the answer, but I just want to see what he would say. What's more important to winning the game? Is it the players or is it the coaching? And he thought a second. He said 60% players, 30% coaching, and 10% luck. But you make your own luck. And so what I would advise, I respectfully disagree with Tracy, and I'll tell you why. What I would advise a strength and conditioning coach to do is, when someone gets out of school, you do whatever you can, volunteer, take the worst paying job, but it's in a position to set you up somewhere, because you have to live somewhere, but you don't have to live in Beverly Hills. You have to drive a car, but it doesn't have to be a Rolls Royce. You could take vacations, but it doesn't have to be a trip around the world. You're at a point in your career when you're young where you're not married, you don't have the responsibility of a mortgage and children, etc. That's the time to do whatever you wanted to do. And personally, I never worried about money. I worried about being as good as I could be, because as naive or as astute as I may have been at that time, if people want the best, they have to pay for it. Whether it's the best lawyer that's going to get you off the murder trial, the best cardiothoracic surgeon that's going to save your life, or the best strength and conditioning coach that's going to help your teams win. At some point down the line, if you're that well-renowned, they're going to have to pay for it. And so I just worried about being the best strength and conditioning coach, physical therapist, athletic trainer combo I could be. And thus, if I would advise people to go to physical therapy school, the reason being, they're always going to have a career. Now they're in strength and conditioning. they're going to be able to look at things and view things that a traditional, and no disrespect to strength coaches, are not going to be able to do. They're going to make adjustments and know how to do things not to exacerbate injuries or surgeries that occurred. They're going to be able to have the argument or the conversation, whatever adjective you want to use, with the medical staff when they say you can't do that exercise or you can't do X, Y, or Z, because they have a medical background too. And they're going to place themselves in a position that's above a traditional strength and conditioning coach. And one other thing I want to add, that what Tracy said before, and I think she's right on with a lot of things, but I look at strength and conditioning coaches, and I look at physical therapists, and I go with the best people. And so to me, Tracy's a physical therapist that happens to be a female. She is not a female physical therapist. That 5'2" individual is a strength coach who's 5'2" who happens to be a female. That's how I look at it. They're either good at their job or they're not. I don't care about gender, race, anything else. And so if you truly are really good at what you do, people will want you. So how do you get that exposure? I think when you're young, you do whatever you need to do by book, by crook, whatever it is, to go to the best. If you're lucky enough to get an internship, fine. If you don't, volunteer, because you're not going to be in that financially stressed situation that you're going to be later on in life. And so I would do anything I could. And then, if it didn't work out, you throw all chips on the table, you actually gave it your best shot. You have no regrets. But I would be a physical therapist, or, I would do whatever it took for me to do to be unique as a strength and conditioning coach. And I'd follow that dream. I would.
That's great. Great. Thanks for that reply from your own personal experience, Rob. Tracy, I'm going to give you just a quick bit here to reply and respond there. And I agree with both of you. I mean, because I see both sides all the time from people I talk to. Tracy?
Well, I think I would, if you're super young and that's, you like Rob said, you have no obligations, and that going to school and doing that, yes, you could position yourself very well. I was just thinking of a particular individual who is a little bit older, who was contemplating going back to PT school. Now, he already has connections in the strength and conditioning world. So he's kind of established himself as a strength coach and then going back. So he's weighing the cost of going back and, taking 3 years out of his life to do that. I think, just every individual's situation, but certainly if it's your passionate dream and you really have a sense of how you can use this particular skill set to enhance your ability to be a strength and conditioning coach, then yes, then I can totally support what Rob said. And you have that vision, then, and you're a go-getter young person, then definitely you can certainly do that. You're gonna have a lot of really some boring exercise programming in school. And I say that because I just spent all Friday afternoon and all day Saturday in a continuing ed course, and I was really disappointed in some of the physical therapy aspects of it. So I'm a little bit jaded today.
I hear you.
I
hear you. I'm gonna let Eric jump in. Eric, your wife's a physical therapist, right?
Yeah.
So do you guys go back and forth on this? Like, I have a better career. No, I have a better career.
No, we don't.
Okay.
But I would say this, like, if I could magically transport myself back in time, I wish I could have gotten something like that, like started as a PT, because I think if you want to be a high performance director, if you're a physical therapist and you're a strength conditioning coach, you have just hit the freaking mother load, because nobody can, I hate to say question, but like, I'll be honest, like I get a lot of people in the world of sports and they're like, wait a second, you're not medical background. How are you overseeing? I'm like, look, in every organization, who hires the doctors at a hospital? Who in colleges, who hires the athletic trainer, an administrator? Ben Peterson's now over all of it at the 49. The GM is hiring the doctors, you see what I'm saying? But if you have that credentialing behind your name, a lot of problems go away. And you have to understand scope of practice and role delineation and all that kind of stuff. But I would just say diversify your skill set. So, we talk about sports science, but because I've done that, I have that ability to go in and speak to that. And it just, you add another layer that you can add to an organization. And so the more things I think that you can add value, especially in the professional level, they really try to limit the numbers, and everybody's got to wear multiple hats. And so the more that you can bring to the table, the more valuable you are. And I would even say for a young person that's trying to get into the profession, like, crap, go learn how to code. It's going to be a skill set that's going to be very valuable. Go learn how to code in R, go learn how to run a database, go learn how to manage and manipulate Excel tables, because they can go in and you can show them, hey, look, we can make stuff on Google Docs, and I have this extra skill set. It's going to put you above other people. And especially where, modern training is that you have, there is data, and the people that can organize it and present it better, you can present a better argument to coaches. I would also, something else I wanted to kind of bring up. I had a conversation with a strength coach at the conference who presented, and he did a great job. And he said he recently interviewed for a job, and he was told, and this guy's been around for a long time, and he said he was told he was too smart for the job. and this was an SEC program. He was too smart for the job. This is a major problem. And I think a lot of reason people are wanting to get out or having a hard time going above a certain ceiling is they're not willing to play the goon game, as I like to say. Like, they're not willing to dumb it down. They're not willing to be have this character, this alter ego that's on social media. You know what I'm saying? And so it's become, if you want to get to the highest levels now, people aren't hired based off of their credentialing or what their experience is. They're hired off of haircuts and mustaches. And so, I don't know will we ever overcome this? I have no idea. I think there's going to be a backlash. You see all the things that are happening. Athletes are dying. But in a lot of these situations where these poor decisions were made on who was hired, there's still no change because of dollars. So
Yep.
it's become an industry where, I don't know, Rob, like, you got to get out there and speak. You got to have a diverse portfolio. You can be the freaking best, and it does not matter sometimes. I got to hear, not Ray Dalio, the guy that basically developed private equity. I'll remember his name. David Rubenstein came and spoke to us. And it was off the record and all this kind of stuff, but I'll just say this. They asked him what he thought were contributors to success. And number one was luck. And they said, and I'll just tell you a quick deal. They said, okay, tell us some mistakes you've made. He goes, well, my daughter was dating this guy. She was at Harvard. And, he was trying to impress me, I thought. And he was telling me about this buddy of his had this thing online where it could connect people in college groups. And I said, no, thank you. And I passed on Facebook to be an original investor. He goes, so I guess that was a mistake, but he also made like other decisions that netted, billions and billions of dollars. So sometimes there is this luck factor that goes into the equation. And I'm finding that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like this diversification thing where, cover all your bases, be the personality, get your education, network, all of these things are so important because, one of these rocks is going to get turned over at some point, I guess. And so that's probably the best advice that I've given people. And I want to talk a bit about the bottom feeders here, which are the track coaches, Mike Hurst. And, if you're a track coach, and what backup plan do you have? And I know you had a pretty good backup plan when you got into all this, but what advice do you have for people who want to get into coaching and you're like, okay, make sure you cover all your bases and, you can have a successful career and a decent life. Mike?
If you love coaching, then you should do it, pursue it, because it'll give you peace of mind that you had a crack at it. If you can make money from it, that's fine, but it shouldn't be the higher order of things. You need to get results with the kids and without flogging them. But you need some kind of backup plan, as you rightly pointed out, as everybody's pointed out, and some kind of education, qualifications, or you could be a journalist like I was. And that took me around the world, and it was okay. And basically I had the Murdoch empire underwriting my coaching as a hobby. I'm still coaching now in retirement as a hobby. I charge the princely sum of $15 a week. And most of the time no one pays. And I'm not upset about it, because particularly with the older ones, I don't really think they can afford to. They're climbing a very slippery ladder to a slippery pole to get up to the Olympic level, and it's expensive. And in this country, in Australia, we don't do a great job of supporting our aspiring athletes. If you've made it to the top, then they will give you some support. But you've got to figure it out yourself pretty much, or you've got to find a coach that's been there and done that, and maybe you can follow a proven pathway. But from a career point of view, coaching in this country, and track and field in particular, is it's a terrible scenario. I wouldn't encourage anybody to pursue it. And the classic example is that you are employed at the whim of the National Federation or a state institute or academy of sport. And most recently, I know it's a while now, but 2004, straight after the Athens Olympic Games, all 18 professional coaches were released by Athletics Australia. And some of those people were really good. Keith Connor, who'd worked at a couple of the top universities, LSU and one of the Texas universities. He's now a bank executive. He is right up there. He's making a squillion. One of the other guys, a Slovenian coach who produced a few very, very high-ranking all-rounders like multis, decathletes, heptathletes. He's now working full-time at Aspire in the Middle East, making really good money, I assume. But it's not happening here. And some of them have fallen back and become school teachers, and they're undervalued, even at the schools. So I would say it's not a good situation, and you're at the whim of somebody else's. The winds have changed. Whatever they want to do, they'll do, and it doesn't make sense, but it doesn't matter. And obviously, they talk a good game, the executives, but they're not delivering. And then they appoint somebody in a high performance area who is a minority background, has a shiny past, full of medals, and but has never worked in an executive position. And he's now in charge of Australia's destiny as a track and field nation. I wish him well. I hope he can succeed. I really do. And he's probably a lovely guy. He's got the gift of the gab, and maybe that's all you need to make your fortune. That's about all I have to say. It's a bit of a gloomy prospect. I'm sorry to put a downer on everything.
Way to go, Mike. But Australia was kind of known as like they're generating sports science people and strength and conditioning coaches through some of the universities there, and they just don't have the jobs to support that. And so I mean, do you come across people who are working in those fields, not just track and field, but other sporting fields where you're like, there's not really a lot of jobs out there. You know, I don't know what your options are. Have you had those discussions?
Yeah, with my own son, he's a very highly qualified exercise physiologist on the medical stream rather than the PE stream. And he's been lucky to get a job working with ice dancing couples off the ice. And most of the time he runs around and makes a few dollars working as a basketball coach at school level and a referee at becoming quite a highly ranked referee. But he's like 27 or something like that. So what's the future? You know, I'm not sure. It worries me a little bit, but I think he's smart enough to figure something out. He can always drop back and work in a old people's home.
Well, encouraging words from Australia. Awesome. Thanks, Mike. I want to get a few other people to join in. Matthew Kritz, you're on here. You've been sitting quietly there, and we just got you on. What do you have to say about all this from what you're hearing?
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. Interesting comments. I can relate to quite a few of the scenarios. I've been doing this for a little while as well, and I think one of the issues that we have with young strength coaches is what's promoted to them when they come out of school. Their expectations are pretty high. I think what they hear and see about salaries within the pros, and they're often looking at that level and don't quite understand the intermediary steps. But I also think that there's another responsibility on those of us who are in positions of power, leadership positions, to ensure that we're preparing these young strength coaches as best as we possibly can, and making sure they understand what the landscape is all about. The reality is at the elite level, if you spent time there, you know that there are fewer of those jobs available. And if you're good at what you do, you want to be in those jobs for as long as possible, because the only way you gain success with your athletes is sustainability and implementing systems and integrations with multidisciplinary support staff. So turnover at high level isn't going to work. And so the expectation that you're going to get a job at that level without putting in the time and energy and waiting, a few decades, to be honest, isn't realistic. So therefore, I some of the comments around working at the age group level and the high school level, I think that's a really good idea. And one of the things that we tried to do, I'm originally from California, but I spent the last 12 years down in New Zealand, opportunity to build up their high performance network. And I was a director of strength and conditioning there. And when I was first brought in 2008, there was 2 national level strength coaches. And once I was appointed and was able to build up a staff of 36, and I valued the people around me, and I valued the profession. And I, in order to make that happen, I guess, in order to build 36 full-time roles throughout a country, we had to, come up with some non-traditional ways of getting people into roles. And one of those was understanding the huge gap between the development level and the elite level, understanding that our elite athletes are V8 engines with Fiat brakes oftentimes because they're not developed to the degree that they need to be. They don't understand, they don't have the training history to support their talent. And so the best way to intervene is at that level. Now we know what's happening at high schools where PE is being pushed to the side and everybody's got a note from mom because mom and dad for what they can't do because of some traditionally old models. But so I think getting strength coaches in those roles who understand the benefit of physical readiness, and can understand how to coach, which is the real caveat here. You can learn, the theory behind the S&C, and you can understand sports science, and you can know how to do some of these other areas around the medical side and coding and this, that, and the other. If you don't know how to coach, if you don't know how to interact, if you don't know how to work with and understand how to impact, particularly our young kids coming up these days who are not remotely as physically robust as they used to be, and just don't know how to, and are afraid of it for all intents and purposes. And so how to break through some of that and attenuate and regress the physical development so that they aren't afraid of it, and then build up. So I think there's some really meaningful jobs in the junior high and high school. We have to change some of the mental models within this country, in the United States, to embrace that. But I think those of us at Power have the ability to do that and to make those really meaningful and to help mentor those people, right? Therefore, the quality of the work that's being done improves, and then the quality of the coaching experience improves. So, so yeah, I think there's a dual role of, when I'm at the University of California, San Diego, we get quite a lot of people interested in interning, and they come in and we have unpaid internships, and I don't like that. I think there's a responsibility that we have to pay for their time, to demand quite a lot of their time, hold them accountable for a level of professionalism, but also make sure we're giving something back that's meaningful, so that when they do get an opportunity to get a role, they are the best candidate, right? Because they've learned some of the most meaningful stuff, and they're in the best position to get that job. So I'm willing to give my time and energy to these interns, as long as they're willing to give their time and energy back. And I don't think that should necessarily be for free after a certain period of time. I think that there's a bit of time where maybe you can't, we can't afford to pay everybody, but after a certain period of time, I think we need to make sure that there's enough money to go around, but we struggle maybe to spread that wealth a little bit, or get the decision makers to understand the value of having that tier of coaches coming underneath, building up their time and energy around your athletes, and building up their knowledge and expertise. That's the next level of employee. That's a great opportunity, great interview process. So anyway, I think there's a few points there, but it's challenging nonetheless.
No, some great points, Matthew. Thank you very much. Even the point about, can we pay these people? And Tracy brought up the point in the chat there about, can we have, one coach or one ATC assigned to each team, rather than having people just smothered by a bunch of teams and everybody saying, well, we don't have the money, when clearly a lot of these colleges and organizations and pro teams have the money. It's just whether or not they've allocated it, or they're committed to giving up that money. And I think, we just have to keep pushing and identifying. And usually the reason is, well, for safety and risk and liability, we have to allocate more people, rather than, this is just the right thing to do. So I want to jump into something else that Matthew talked about too, and just creating more adaptable people to adapt to the future, I guess, situations and scenarios, whether it's private, like some of the stuff I see in the private sector is very creative in terms of saying, hey, this is a need, and people fill that need. And I'll get people like Doug to jump in, because I think New York City and Rob is this great sort of area where a lot of stuff happen and good ideas come out of there. But first I want to get Ryan Banta in. Ryan, we talked about track and field. You're coming from the school teacher route. I mean, should everybody be a school teacher and then decide to be a coach as a backup plan? Can you talk specifically about that situation?
Well, I think if you want to be gainfully employed and have some job security, being a teacher is a good place to be. Everybody always talks about how difficult, the job of being a teacher is, but I think it's just like anything else, which is some of the things you guys have discussed, is that if you're a good manager of people, then you're probably going to be a good teacher, and then the content and all that stuff can come later. The problem with college jobs, and people have talked to me a lot of, when are you going to jump to the college ranks? Well, with my teacher salary, which has been supported by a robust union, and my pension that I have, it's very hard for a college or university to match my pay. And then the other problem is if you do decide to go the high school route or the educator route in America, before you go on to do some professional coaching or collegiate coaching, is that the NCAA basically says, do you have any NCAA experience? If you don't have any NCAA experience as a coach, we're not going to hire you. Well, gosh darn it. Some of the best coaches, no offense to anybody who's here with me now and I'm talking to now, but I can tell you that most of the very best coaches I have met are in the high school ranks. And a lot of the charlatans who, Mike Hurst mentioned lots of medals and the gift of gab, they're in the professional ranks because maybe they've had some great experience as an athlete. But I mean, I've found very few people out there, sans John Wooden, who have had a good athletic career, have also been really, 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 really highly elite coaches that are really good at their craft. And also, I think it's what Eric mentioned, being good at a lot of other things. Learning to code actually is a little bit of a trigger thing. So I've kind of be careful with that. But anyway, having some skills beyond that. The other thing I'll say, going back to the educational route, is that teaching has made me a better coach and coaching has made me a better teacher. And so having that job security and having the ability to make some mistakes where the consequences financially for someone aren't as big has helped me become a better teacher, because I've been allowed the time as a teacher and a coach to grow into that position. But that's where I have the big problem with the NCAA, is that they say you have to have NCAA experience. It's like having credit without credit. So, where does the line get drawn? I'm currently ranked in the state of Missouri as the 12th active coach in state medals, and I've been coaching for 16 years. This will be my 17th season. Is that enough? And when you cut out that group of people that are used to being around young people and used to being around kids and have kids at heart and have young people at heart, most teachers, I can't speak for everybody, you're cutting out a lot of people who might actually end up being very good as a PT person, as a strength and conditioning person, as a coach of a particular sport, because they've been there, done that. And the whole purpose, the why that they do this career is to help people, and so you're already hiring somebody who's in a much better place in terms of why they do it. I had things demystified for me when I went to the Olympic Training Center, and people were talking about, oh, I really want to be a national coach for the USATF. Well, a national coach for the USATF is a chauffeur half the time, and then if you have one position of power, the relay coach, now you've got to deal with agents and a whole bunch of Nike contracts and Adidas contracts, and you've got to deal with people that don't want to show up, and you can't get anything to coalesce as a group. So in some respects, as many of us want to go to these higher levels, what you're going to find out is you're going to get disappointed, because what you expect things to be might not be what you want. I recently had a conversation with an NBA strength coach, and the NBA strength coach basically said he doesn't do anything other than just stretch the kids out or guys out and do a bunch of yoga, because none of those guys want to do anything he's asking them to do. And they're actually pretty good in terms of minutes per play and timeout away from the game and all that kind of stuff. And he's coming to me to talk to me about, hey, what are things that you do at your high school? And I'm trying to have the conversation, hey, what do you do with this NBA team? And both of us came away from that conversation a little bit befuddled, because I think both of us were looking to get something from the other. And that's not really the way the conversation went. So I think when the wool gets pulled from people's eyes about the realities of elite sport and elite strength and conditioning and PT and all of that, I think some people come away really disappointed. And so to end this rant, I really like the fact that I'm an educator and that I have this job and that I'll have a pension, and that when I retire, if then I want to take the risk of being a grad assistant volunteer level coach at an NCAA school in town, I can then take that risk, because I'm not going to lose anything financially and ruin my family in the process.
Yeah, some good points there, Ryan. And I hear this all the time, and I'll get Eric to jump in after this, but there seems to be a gatekeeper mentality at different levels. So if you're in the NFL, I always hear this, like, you have to have does he have NFL experience? Eric, what are your thoughts about, you were in the NFL, where everybody walking around with a badge like, I'm in the NFL? Like, are you in the NFL too? Like it's a little bit much after a while, but Ryan brought up some good points.
at this USA football thing, Mike Tomlin spoke, and he actually said that NFL coaches are highly paid PE coaches. And he goes, some of our biggest decisions each day are which sweatsuit I'm going to wear, the gold one or the black one. And it's hilarious. Nobody ever actually asked me that except for one person, and it was, I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole. This person just was a total butthole anyways. And they brought it up as soon as, like, look, you're better in the NFL, so just kind of sit back and come on, man. Like, football is football. It doesn't, I mean, there are nuances to the games and the preseason, but football is football. It's just the cost of the game's a little bit higher at that level and the orthopedic considerations. So yeah, like I think there's a little bit too much of that, and a lot of organizations are bringing people in have never done anything in football right now, and I think that's great, or never done anything at the NFL level, or they have experience in different pieces, and like Ben Peterson was just the Flyers, is now at the 49ers. Ben's got a lot of experience in a lot of different areas as a strength coach. Spent a lot of time in NFL offices, but he was just in the NHL. And so I think, Adam Beard just got the high performance director role at the Cubs, never been in baseball. So if you're a great problem solver, I think eventually you're gonna find the right job for you. And I also think some people with military experience.
Can I throw something at you, Eric? Do you think the one thing that I've seen is that the sports science label has somehow managed to penetrate that? For good and bad, like people, the sports scientist is coming and everybody shuts up for a bit. And I don't know if that's necessarily good or bad, but I've seen that a bit. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, my personal experience is it didn't really mean much in the building I was in. Okay. I think it's just every one of these NFL places is its own unique world. I mean, you got an owner that has a unique situation, and I mean, in the financial situation, I mean, every one of those places is totally different from another place. And you can walk in and spend 24 hours and you will know whether it's good or bad. And so I do think, sports science is becoming more accepted. It's just another role, kind of like in-game strategist now. Somebody that's up in the box helping the coach look at how to spend timeouts. Nobody really ever asked me about besides one person, about my NFL experience. They were like, look, if you can add value, you can add value. And like the sports medicine people never said one word about it. So
that's good.
I had a good relationship with
them. Doug, I wanted to throw something at you. There were some discussion about maybe people being more adaptable, being more diverse. And I know the time I spent with you when I'm in New York and with Rob, I see a lot of people doing things that are different and unconventional. And I think that's kind of cool. Now, should we be throwing that at young aspiring strength coaches? Like, hey, these are some things you could do. Go out there. Don't just try to be the college strength coach doofus or whatever we called them, goon. Don't try to just be the pro sports guy. Here are some other things that you can do working with general population or creating some niches for yourself. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think in New York, that's more of a necessity because they have pro sports teams in New York, but those pro sports teams already have medical and performance staff. So
and they're all horrible.
Living in New York, I mean, I'm not going to comment on that, but no, but I mean, like I run a physical therapy practice in New York City. Like, for me to make money, I can't cater to professional or like quote unquote elite athletes because there aren't that many of them. And the ones that are truly at that level probably are on a professional team, right? So general population from a business standpoint is where it's at in New York. And, Tracy made the point, like, because I think the distinction between what Rob and Tracy are talking about is really important. If you're 35 years old and you've been a strength coach for 15 years, now you're contemplating going to physical therapy school. That's different than being 21, having just finished undergrad. You don't have as much invested. Like, the risk reward is different depending on where you are in your career. But if let's say you're a 30-year-old personal trainer who's doing 40 sessions a week in New York City, you could charge $200 an hour for personal training, and that's almost the market rate. At most places, you're probably spending, let's say, 30 to 40 an hour. You're giving that back to your facility if you're an independent trainer. So you're making well above six figures to be a personal trainer working with zoomPOP. Is that the time where you want to spend 30 to 40 grand a year to go to PT school for 3 years, give up your personal training clientele, and then take an entry-level PT job for 70 grand a year? So the reason why, you're saying people are being adaptable in New York, it's because that's the only game in town. Like, so you're not, everyone always thinks like, oh, I want to work with elite people. But somebody brought up the military setting and how like pro sports is now, they're hiring performance directors from the military. Having been in the military in a special operations unit as an operator, not as a medical person, I can tell you that they have all these programs, these human performance programs, but nobody actually uses them. It's the same thing as in sports. Like, no one's required to do these brand new fitness tests they develop or to do these new workouts or to monitor themselves. People pretty much do whatever they want. And a lot of guys are doing things like CrossFit, they're doing triathlons, and really, as long as people are like doing a good job on missions and there's no like really obvious physical limitation in their job specific training, no one's making them do these programs. So this idea that like, most of us got into this field because we want to make like that, 0.1% difference in performance. But the reality is, like, even at the elite level, you're lucky if you can even do the most basic thing and the low hanging fruit. I remember going to Mike Robertson's performance seminar in Indianapolis a couple of years ago, and he had Ryan Horn from Wake Forest, and he had Chris Chase from, at the time, the Grizzlies, talking about their sort of approach to physical preparation. And because Ryan's in a college setting and he can pretty much control everything that goes on, it was like, we're doing, Charlie Francis speed progressions, or we're doing this periodized strength system. And it works really well with his setting because you have 18 to 21-year-olds who have to do what you say. Whereas Chris Chase was like, I am ecstatic if I can get an NBA player to do a leg extension in the hotel gym on the road. So depending on the setting, there can be a lot of constraints. And oftentimes we think that the higher level we go at, like the less constraints we're going to have. It's the opposite, right? So if you truly want to coach and it's about coaching and developing and not so much the ego of being at like the highest level, you can probably make more of a difference at the developmental high school level, college level, even like Division 2 or 3, where there aren't all these financial considerations, than you can at the pro, or even because at a place like in the SEC, I mean, you could literally do nothing with these people, and they could look at a weight, and some of them will grow. So I'm not saying there aren't great coaches at that level and working with those teams, but they're often constrained by head coaches and administrators. And at the high school level, nobody really cares. So you can do more of what you want. But in New York, to answer your question, you're less constrained working with general population, and that's why a lot of people are doing that, because there's just not a market for like high level sport.
So when are you going to start your 6-figure Manhattan internship program to get people adaptable, right? Like, because that was interesting that I thought like, well, you have to be adaptable. I mean, shouldn't that be part of everybody's preparation program to some degree? What are your thoughts on that, Doug? Just quickly.
Yeah, you have to be adaptable depending on what the constraints are. But the problem is in a lot of these like really higher level organizations, they're just dictating what you can do, and you don't have a lot of choice. Like, you can't be that adaptable even if you wanted to, or you have to adapt to kind of, the way to adapt is to be more risk averse, more politically correct, kind of play the game, because it's like, all right, once you're entrenched in some of these settings, then the best thing you could do is to not rock the boat, or to capitulate to the GM, the head coach, the athletic director. So, I mean, if you're making $300,000 a year because your head football coach wants you to be the hype guy headbutting people on the sidelines, like, I mean, I haven't been in that situation, but would I say no to that if like I was offered that job? Like, it's hard. It's easy for all of us to say we wouldn't do that. That's stupid. but we're not in that situation and we're not being offered that kind of money. And if you have to make compromises to, like make a great living, like I don't think any of us are necessarily above that, even if we say that we are. So it's very easy to be critical. You asked about the internship thing, so I want to touch on that real quick, because I would say that like I learned the most during my internships, that apprenticeship-based model. Now, and in some ways, I found those unpaid internships way more valuable than what I paid for formal education. I mean, we're always like, we're very critical of like college strength and conditioning departments or physical therapy clinics that don't offer money for internships. Meanwhile, you've got universities charging 40 grand a year for tuition, and they're not really teaching anybody anything, if we're being, in a lot of cases. So I think that when it comes to internships, ideally people would do them when they're already in school, because they're effectively, if they can do it for academic credit, right? Because they're already giving money to the school. At a minimum, the school should say, look, we're going to give you academic credit to do this internship. It's a win for them because they literally get paid to do nothing. And this way the student can do an internship while they're not necessarily giving up income, because they would have been taking a class anyway. So I don't think there's a perfect way to do the internship thing, but if you're going to do it, I think people should get academic credit for it because they're in school anyway. They may as well learn something of value besides have a professor indoctrinate them into something. So that's my kind of soapbox on the internships.
Awesome. Good points there. Matthew, did you want to add something to this?
Yeah, I thought it was that one thing that keeps creating a bit of a rift between what we want to do and often the reasons why we get into this profession, and then what we can't do because we realize that perception and reality don't meet. I think one of the reasons when I started off as a strength coach, that's where my roots are. That's where I'm proud to associate with. And you learn, as some of the other speakers have said, you learned how to adapt and you learn how to pick up different skill sets, whether it is learning more advanced coding in Excel, or you understand GPS technology, you learn the physiology, the medical side of it. Because if you really want to be impactful, you kind of have to understand all the influences that the athlete is going to experience. But I quite quickly realized that if we want to have a real meaningful impact, we've got to be higher up on the food chain and be making decisions that are going to influence the common good. One of the issues you have is the people that do the hiring don't really understand who they're hiring or the value of who they're hiring. They're just filling a spot. So then we look at individuals who are in these high-paying roles, and maybe we don't think that they have earned it, or they haven't earned the money that they're making, because once you find they are just as was said, head slapping, yelling and screaming, motivation kind of guys. When you get into those environments and you see all the meaningful work that could be done, and you say, oh, well, what do they really need to do that for? They've already got the best athletes, so they just kind of have to keep the momentum going. But then you look at the rate of injury and the incident of injury and how hard it is for athletes to get back on the field, and you listen to the way social media and ESPN talks about ACLs or death sentences and Achilles or death sentences, and whether they will ever come back. And those of you who have worked in those environments and have not only effectively but really revolutionarily rehabbed athletes with ACLs and have not had issues, you realize that that's just all a bunch of BS. So I think really, for me personally, it's been to try to get to a level of leadership where you can influence the decision makers so they really understand what they're getting and the value of what they have. We still do battle with those in other institutions, particularly when the NC2A, that will only hire, people who have come from that conference, who've only worked in that sport, and they think that's what validates you. That's going to be, that's always going to be part of the game, I guess, until you get into a position where you can start to change people's mindsets and influence accordingly. But that's one of the real issues is once you are in a position of power, the more opportunity you can have to talk to athletic directors, general managers, get into a position where you can be the one responsible for hiring the right staff, making sure that they know how to integrate well together. then, you start working out from there, from that professional level down into the community and influence accordingly, whether it's through workshops and conferences and so on and so forth. That's where I think the meaningful work can be done if you have gotten to a level of where you've achieved a level of respect and you're wanting to be heard, I guess.
Yep, very good points, and that should be happening in the office of the president, but we won't go there. Dash, I want you to chime in here because we've had talks about this, and you're not at that young, very young, impressionable, like I'll do anything age. You're kind of, 30, 31 now, and you have to make some decisions about your career. What are your thoughts about what everybody has had to say here right now?
I mean, I kind of like, because we were talking the other day, I am the one driving 2 hours every day, to work and then from work, and it's cool. But I'm coaching, and to make money so I can pay the bills, I'm doing bounty hunting and bail bondsing. Like, it is what it is. But Rob brought up some good points. It kind of re-inspired me. It's like, I just got to keep coaching and be the best I can to get noticed, hopefully, right? Because if I'm worried about me being the product, then I just have to be the best coach possible, and hopefully someone sees it and picks me up. I mean, other than that, I really don't know where to go about it. Like, because, I am 30, 31. We were talking, okay, maybe I switch career field. But if I did that, I wouldn't be happy. As, Mike said, he's a coach. He does it as a hobby and a side because it's something that truly gives him passion, and something that at the end of the day, he doesn't want to shoot himself. Like, he enjoys it. He loves it, right? So I'm okay with 4 hours in the car. I get audiobooks done and, a whole bunch of podcasts, and that's fine. I try to make the best of the time, but it is what it is at this point. I think if I truly threw in the towel and went somewhere else with a career, I wouldn't be as fulfilled or happy. So,
but you do agree that this current trend for you is not sustainable, and that you've got to make some progress, and you've got to, things have got to change, and maybe you look at some other ways to diversify your experience and skill set.
I definitely agree. Like, this is not sustainable for, long term. I got to at least give it a year, see what happens. Maybe the doors open through it and something, but I can't, it can't just throw in the towel. Like, yeah, it sucks, but you're right. I need to find another way to diversify myself. I've been looking into trying to make a business model with the tactical athletes of the police forces or police departments here in California, because there's nothing done yet. So it's something I'm looking into, but it's got, trying to meet the right people.
Rob, what are your thoughts after hearing, a bunch of the different opinions here and hearing what Dash has to say about what you had said earlier?
Yeah, I think, first of all, if you're going to go into coaching, you better not go into it for the money. That's the first thing. And if you're fortunate enough to, go through a progression where you make a good living, then God bless you. And I think you better have something to fall back on. I agree with Matt 100%. I think if you really want something to work, and I'm not going to talk about an organization like the NCAA or the NFL. I'm going to speak about an institution or a team. Then you better have somebody in charge that knows how to hire, knows what they're looking for, that knows how to make people work together and departments work together, that can't be BS'd on the subject matter. So, they better, what is your training programs? What are your rehab programs? How are you integrating with each other when someone is hurt? What is nutrition doing with regards to performance? And does that nutrition change when someone is injured? What is, GPS, what is sports performance doing with regards to training? And what are our models in rehab to go through progression to get them back to training? And how's everybody working together? And then you have to hold everybody accountable so that, if they don't do their job, there's no just because you're somebody's friend, you're keeping it. And that's the only way it's going to work. And that's how and I think if you can pull that off at a school or a team, you'll have a distinct advantage over the competition, because you'll have the integration of many minds working together with accountability. The other thing I want to add is that, the NFL which was probably the pinnacle years ago of strength and conditioning in America, right? You know, that's where everybody wanted to go. They got to do all these things. I have a good friend of mine who's in the NFL, and you know, essentially, or was in the NFL, and he was speaking to two general managers a year and a half ago, and both general managers are looking to eliminate the strength and conditioning programs because they can't find good ones. They can't find good strength coaches. And with the onset of the CBA, where someone, you know, has 5 to 7 weeks to train, and then you have the in-season, if you want business people with business minds running an organization, which you do have in pro team sports, if you want to look at the NFL, they could say, let's hire Derek Hansen, and instead of paying $500,000 a year, we'll pay him $250,000. We'll bring him in for the 7 weeks of the off season, and we'll bring him in for the 4 months of the in season. And I save myself $250,000, and I still have my athletes trained. Do not think those conversations aren't going on. So, you know, I don't know what's going to happen with the profession. I at one point in time, I thought it was at its pinnacle, and now I really think the profession is going to have some difficulties. I really do.
Yeah, that's a good question, Rob. Like if a strength coach is making, even in college, you know, you look at the top football program, $600,000-$700,000 a year. At what point do people start going, what are we doing? Why are we paying this amount? You know.
I'm not against that, because you're paying actors $20 million for a movie. You know, you're paying CEOs, you know, millions of dollars. If someone is truly one of the best in their particular profession, I believe that they should be paid for that. But if they're not, then they should be held accountable, and then they should be replaced. So I have no problem, you know, with people making a good living. I don't. But you know, and I think the other thing that I think teams miss is, and again, it's my opinion, you know, they say about opinions, right? Is that it's not just the moment. If you put together this system that works, you're adding longevity to a career. And so or you should be adding longevity to a career, with the exception of the freak trauma or whatever, right? And so thus, the agents are happy and the players are happy because you have more contracts. The staff's happy because if everybody's meeting their potential, hopefully you're winning, and that's cyclical, right? You may have a couple losing seasons, but people are keeping their jobs, and everything's working in unison. So the factor that I really look at is, you know, what would you start with for longevity? Not just, you know, the flash in the pan. What are we going to do for the 2019 season? The 2019 season is probably the foundation of what's going to happen, you know, through a progression of time.
Yeah, I just wanted to, if I could, just add something around after hearing Dash. I thought, for those that are listening, or you know, around a little bit of motivation, I think it's important that the reality is, in listening to some of the esteemed speakers who have had a few decades in this. One of the key messages is you have to be nimble, you have to be dynamic, you have to be flexible in your thinking. You have to understand, in order to be a leader of a sports performance unit, you have to understand the value that each one of those pillars provide, and how they contribute to the athlete's success, which means you either have had to have been responsible doing that on the road and failed miserably a few times, and then had to figure out how to do it right. But bottom line is, you have to understand the value each one of those pillars provide in nutrition, sports psychology, performance analysis, sports medicine, strength and conditioning, in order to be able to lead those effectively, to ensure your athletes are physically ready and more robust to injury. The other thing is just being nimble and going where the opportunities are. My personal situation was that when I got into strength and conditioning in the mid 90s, and being in California and starting off at a school that was a non-football school, I very much at that point thought that I'd have to go be an assistant somewhere in middle America and be within a football university in order to be considered credible, and to kind of follow that path. But that just wasn't where my heart was. My heart was with Olympic-based sports. That's what I had been involved in as a youth athlete. And so I kind of wanted to hold on to that and try to see what I could make of it. That took me overseas. I had a young family at the time, and that took me to Australia and then New Zealand. I have 3 kids. I've been around the world, multiple countries, supporting national programs in different countries. And they've been opportunities that I wouldn't give up, but I also didn't know that that's what I would be doing either way back when. I just knew that I loved doing what I was doing. I wanted to continue to grow and evolve. The profession was telling me that I needed to learn certain things, that I wasn't good enough in certain areas after getting feedback and being and self-reflecting. So I needed to go where those opportunities were. And I just had to not be afraid to do that and figure out a way. And the more that you were able to do that and get to places and environments and make it work for you, the more you learned, the more opportunity you got, and the better opportunity you got. But it does come down to one thing too that has been said a few times. You've got to be good at what you do, right? No one's going to get. There's too many opportunities that people have been given, and they ain't that good, and it just gets exposed. So you really have to be relentlessly good at your craft, whatever that is. Now, I was always a strength coach, and then figured out some of these other skill sets along the way. But at the end of the day, I'm still a meathead strength coach, no matter what my title is, and no matter how many degrees I have and letters after my name. I take pride in the fact that I'm a meathead strength coach. It is about fitter, faster, stronger. The last time I saw it, sports weren't espousing lower, slower, and weaker. So getting people physically more ready, but doing that in a way that is ensuring that you're not just loading and exploding athletes, but you're physically developing them within their capability and their competency is a skill, is a craft, is an art. But the art of anything is the unexpected use of science. So you got to understand the science of it. You got to then understand how to speak that to whatever environment you're working in. And that just takes time. It takes time to marinate, time under tension, as they say. It applies in our field as well as it applies in coaching. You need to coach, you need to make mistakes. And so if opportunities present where it takes you to if the opportunities present where you can coach more, then that's what I would take. And then if you're good at what you do, doors will continue to open.
Yeah, well said. Well said, Matt. Anybody else have any comments? I'm going to let Mike Hurst wrap us up. But does anybody else have any comments before we sign off? Ryan?
I was just going to say that, what we do have to understand is like Rob said, that this job is not necessarily one that's going to make you rich in terms of money. But if you play the job right and you do the job the way it's supposed to be, when college people and Olympians have been interviewed on these meta-analyses on what made the difference between a good coach and a bad coach, and all these athletes reported from high school all the way up to Olympic medalists, they said, what was the determining factor between that coach being a good or bad coach? And every one of those athletes said it was about the relationship. It was about the relationship and whether I trusted them or not. And so when you get into this, you're not going to necessarily be wealthy, and you're not necessarily going to have the most glorious work all the time. But at the end of the day, when people are drinking whiskey over my cabinet, cabinet, brother, who knows? I could be, who knows?
You're getting a Costco casket, eh?
Yeah, they're putting me in a little urn or whatever. Yeah, I'll be on the cabinet. But anyway, when they tell those stories about me, I want those stories to be positive stories where they didn't believe in something at the beginning and I made them a believer, and they accomplished the wildest things they could ever have imagined that they would have accomplished through sport. They made some of their best friends through sports. They met, their colleague, their significant other through sport. And if I played a role or a small part in making some of those things happen, that is wealth. It's wealth of relationships. And so, is the sport difficult at times? Yes. Can it drive you nuts? Yes. Will people in your own neighborhood think you don't know what you're doing, and then 1,000 miles away, they're begging you to come out and do a talk? Yes. But at the end of the day, the kids and young men and women that we work with and those relationships that we develop with them is the rewarding part of the job. That's why we do the job. And if you don't have that attitude and you don't have that understanding, this might not be a career for you, because this career is about people. We're pushing people to their limits. And in order to do that, you've got to have strong relationships.
That's a perfect segue to our veterans track coach, Mike Hurst. Mike, you kind of started off with kind of a bleak look at track and field coaching in Australia. What do you have to say to young people moving forward? What are some positive things that you've gotten out of it, and what encouragement would you provide to people looking into coaching as a profession, and maybe even having a little side gig to actually make real money?
I think if it's your calling, then follow it, go to it, embrace it, develop yourself as you develop others. It is, as Ryan says, about the connection. And for me, like, I'm in my late 60s now, and it keeps me connected to community, to young people coming through, keeps my mind young, keeps my mind active. I enjoy working with puzzle athletes, trying to sort the issues out. I don't have a medical background, but I work with a lot of people who do, and I enjoy seeing and working with, people, like the coaches here. And, I would say follow it and pursue it. And at some point you reach a fork in the road. You sort of say, well, okay, I'm going to do this as a hobby because I'm not going to make enough money out of this. It's not why I'm in the game. Or you go off on another tangent, another track, and you make money, and you've got 200 athletes, mostly kids or masters athletes who just want to run around the park a little bit faster, that sort of thing. And that's actually happening. I met a lady the other day who's got more than 200 clients. It's amazing. And she's hitting them up for, I think it's $30 a session. And she'll do maybe 3 sessions a week. That's a lot of money if you're hitting 200 people up, and she's just busy as anything. So, but I think that that can all come tumbling down if you start to mislead people. So the onus is on you as a coach to continue the education process and to continue connecting with people, because if you are the smartest person in the room, you are in trouble.
Yeah, well, I encourage people, if you're on Facebook, to follow Mike, because he posts some great stuff on the Fast Track 400 group, where it shows him talking to his athletes, and they're running workouts, and they're collapsing and vomiting on the grass, and it's just awesome. But you get to see the interactions too. Mike, I like when you actually talk to them and get some feedback from them, and that's really good stuff as well. So keep doing that.
Nothing more beautiful than exhausted athletes sometimes. Sometimes.
But yeah, no, that's great stuff. So thank you very much, everybody, for jumping on. Some great stuff. And even though the groups have been smaller, we've been having some really quality discussions. So let's try to keep that going and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And let's just keep, pushing for the cause, I guess.
Thank you, everyone. I learned a lot today.